Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest, the official podcast of the Brock Press, where we take you beyond the headlines and do a deep dive into some of the many interesting articles written by our team this week. My name is Noah Nickel. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brock Press and host of the latest, and today I'm joined, as always, by Holly Morrison, our managing editor, as well as one of our arts and entertainment editors, Asenia Lyall. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
I'm doing well, thank you.
How are you,
Well,
Noah?
good. How am I? No one asked how I am. No, I'm good. I'm good. All is well. But yes, great to have both of you here today for these fun topics. We always have a fun time. Three of us get rambling about movies and whatnot. So a lot of the news this week I felt was kind of a continuation from last week. I don't know if either of you felt the same way, but you still kind of have Joe Rogan and his issues. They might have changed now to other controversial topics, but he's still kind of in hot water. The truckers are still honking their horns in Ottawa nonstop. And kind of beyond that, nothing has really evolved per se, or not a lot new has come up. But because of that, we got a chance this week, most of us, to explore some evergreen topics, as we lovingly call them here at the Brock Press, which are those that really never go out, of fashion. They're always topics you can come back to regardless of, what's in the news. Naturally, they make for great podcast topics. So this week, with that said, is chock full of some evergreen topics, a little bit of timely one with the romantic comedy stuff, but Chad's feature on education, for example. And if time permits, Holly's opinion piece about mathematics and learning math in school. But yeah, with that, we will get into the discussion. So this week, for his big feature piece for the winter semester, one of our news editors, Chad Ellis, wrote about some of the issues he's come to notice with the education system, particularly with universities, during his time as an undergrad at Brock. While his views are primarily based on his personal experience, most of the criticisms he kind of levies in the article can easily extend to, throughout Ontario and likely, beyond Ontario to Canada and, even elsewhere. I'm sure it's not much different than when you're talking kind of in these bigger issues he identifies. Some of the things he talks about are, the major imbalance and inequity between international and domestic student tuition rates, as well as the just general precipitous rise of tuition rates in general, and also the increasing reliance on precarious contract professors, and a few more things that we'll get into when we kind of break this down further. So I'll throw it to you two right away. So how do you think we could best address some of the the issues with tuition costs? Particularly, Chad noted that for Brock undergrads, it's climbed 12% for domestic students and 75% for international students in the last 8 years, which, I knew it was a lot, but those numbers were pretty crazy to me. But I'm just curious what either of you think could, maybe address this rise somewhat.
I guess it's sort of hard to say, because I think the reason that it keeps rising and being so inaffordable, it has to do a lot with the kind of society that they exist in, which sort of is a cop-out answer. But I guess I don't really know a lot about the nitty-gritty of running a university, but I do know that in a lot of cases it's run more like a business than like a school, and that's because there's a focus on profits, and then you have to pay everybody involved in running a university, and so it's expensive to run a university, so it's expensive to go to a university. But I think if there was more sort of importance placed on education beyond just you need a degree to get a job, regardless of if the degree actually has anything to do with what your job is, that could be a step in the right direction. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think that definitely made sense. I also think one of the things that Chad mentioned in the article was just the way that universities get funding. government funding for publicly funded institutions has been sort of like steadily declining. And so, yeah, it does have a lot to do with like the society and the sort of government of the time and just what the society that like universities exist in values. And it seems like less and less we value publicly accessible education.
It is interesting, though, because there's this sentiment that, like, oh, you're never going to be able to get a good job if you don't go to university. But then universities are, like, inaccessibly expensive, and everyone's going into tremendous amounts of debt to get a degree. And then a lot of the jobs that you're going to get after the degree, like, you don't necessarily apply the learning that you did in university to those degrees, because a lot of university programs are not that practical. They're very, like, research-oriented, and I've noticed this especially with like applying to grad school. A lot of the time you go into university and you're doing research and you're learning skills that will allow you to work at a university. And so the kinds of doors that you're opening up with like undergrad and graduate education is to work in a university, which is kind of weird because it's a very small world when you think of it that way.
Not a bad place to get a job though, if you can swing it. To that. So there is value in working at a university, even if that's all universities prepare you for. But no, I get the larger point that that's obviously, it's very pigeonhole, it's very much pigeonholes people. Whereas, I know a couple friends who are getting certificates and diplomas or whatever they're called at colleges in Ontario, and they're much more tailored to the things that they want to do. They're much more job oriented, and so for people that were kind of misled or didn't really understand what there was for them to gain from going to university, getting an undergrad degree, I think they're kind of kicking themselves, some of them, but others are just frankly just finishing their degrees or even stopping halfway through and going to get a 1 or 2 year certificate or diploma instead in something that they feel is more career oriented and more kind of geared towards their interests, which I think importantly is becoming less stigmatized, because I think there was definitely a major block with going to college, especially with how we how it was kind of the streaming system in high school for classes, right? College was the one that was looked down upon, was the one for the people who had lower grades. And it's kind of, since then, I feel that we've kind of been tracked to believe a certain, things about university versus college that aren't necessarily true.
Yeah, and like you were mentioning, like certificate jobs and like jobs that a college program, so like jobs more in the trades, and then also like programs that are more hands-on. I also find with like university degrees and the kind of jobs that you get out of university, especially when it comes to like academia, like those jobs might be good if you're able to sort of like swing it and get like a permanent position. But I found that like, because I have friends who are like very in academia, like those jobs are getting harder and harder to get like as time goes on. So they might be good jobs, but you also have to sort of like work yourself like basically to death, doing sort of free work and working for pennies to even like get a chance at getting a good job. So I think the skills that sort of university teaches you, it sort of tells you that they're going to be like incredibly valuable and they're going to sort of enhance your life, and then you can't really apply them in the field that they're most applicable to because it's even more inaccessible.
Yeah, I think people are realizing quickly that to pursue the field that you have dreamed of working in takes more than just going to school. And it's not fair to put that necessarily on individuals themselves. It's definitely something that was perpetuated in high school for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like I wouldn't have this job if I didn't decide to go to university. And like, I don't know, this job in first year at least is very much what made me realize what I want to do. So it was a lot of money to pay to make that realization, but I don't think I would have otherwise.
Yeah, like there has to be a better way for people to figure out what they want to do with their lives, because I feel really similarly, where it's like I figured out a lot of stuff in university, and I got to do a bunch of things that I would never have known about or known that I like doing. But then I'm like, okay, but you're supposed to go to university having already decided what you want to do with your life at like 17 years old, and then you get to university and you have to readjust because you don't really know that much about the world when you're 17.
Yeah, a 2 or 3 year journalism degree from a college would have been sufficient for me. But hey, I'm here now, and I got a hefty monthly payment for 10 years ahead of me, so no looking back, I guess. But yeah, if anyone in high school hears any of this, please take your time before picking a program. Not to say that I haven't enjoyed mine or that you can't kind of make changes and decisions on the fly, but you're signing up for more than more than 4 years. But with that, on to the next question. So Chad also talked about research at universities and how it's increasingly becoming tied with private business. But this isn't necessarily a new thing. It might be in like a more out in the open or extreme way in recent years, but it's been a long time coming that, or going that governments have been funding public research that goes on to massively support private businesses and their inventions, quote unquote, their products that they've created, but in reality, it's on the backs of a lot of publicly funded research, but they get to privatize the benefits of that. So I'm just wondering your guys' thoughts on that. If you think that's something that we should kind of keep how it is, or that doesn't seem right to you.
I guess we're seeing, like, again, the results of everything being motivated by profit. And so on one hand, I'm like, I think research should happen and be used in the way that's going to better society as much as possible. But on the other hand, I'm like, if there weren't privatization, would it happen? Who would pay for it? And like, we're sort of stuck in this system where everything's like a circle of how are you going to make money?
Yeah, I think like the sort of like how are you going to make money question driving research is, I think, maybe like a bigger problem than the fact that like research helps sort of private industry. Just the fact that like the things that people are able to sort of learn about are sort of motivated entirely by what's going to make them money. Like, I know the thing that they talk about is making sure that their research is something that they can sort of sell to a team one day. And like, of course, like, power to them, use your research to get a job with the Blue Jays or whatever. But also, like, aren't there like, there are so many questions that like I have and that other people have that like I think deserve to be answered that aren't necessarily going to make a whole lot of money for a whole lot of people. And so I think just the fact that money drives what questions get answered is, for me, the thing that is, I think, the most sort of problematic.
If you couldn't tell by the way I phrased the question, I don't like it. Definitely don't like that governments fund research at universities, and that research then goes on to make companies tons of money, and the government sees none of that. I think that's pretty backwards, and really is putting on so much of the burden. You know what I mean? Like the cost of doing business is being put on the government rather than massive businesses, despite them profiting wildly off of it. Like Apple is one I know, they benefited massively from public research in the States. Even the vaccines, for example, the COVID vaccines, a lot of that research is from publicly funded institutions around the world. And, because of patent protections, a very small number of companies have been able to mildly profit off of the vaccines. And that's, a perfect example of what Chad talks about, and kind of the issue with how like research is focused. And I mean, Holly, you touched on it as well. The always looking at the ability to sell research is not exactly, it doesn't fit that mold that Chad mentioned in his article, and Asenia, you mentioned of bettering society, right? The value of the research becomes its ability to be commoditized rather than rather than just to be for the benefit of all of us. Education topic on Chad's article deals with how he talks about quality assurance and performance of universities and how that's kind of become very professionalized. I guess not really the right word, but just kind of standardized. I guess that's a better term for it. So I was just curious how you both think would be best to judge a university's quote unquote performance.
I don't know what the best way to judge the performance of a university is, but I know that I don't think it should be how many people can we give degrees, and how much money can we make, because I know a lot of people who don't really give a shit about their education and they're just sort of like doing the bare minimum and they still pass all their classes even though they're not learning anything. And it's like the reason they're here is because everyone's expected to go to university, and that's sort of like a thing that I think is wrong. Like, I don't think everyone should need to go to university to be able to get a good job. And I think if you're in university and you don't really want to be learning anything, then there's no point in being there, because it's so expensive and it's a lot of time. And then universities end up just sort of like churning out degrees without actually prioritizing teaching people things. There's a lot of things that I find like frustrating about how universities work. In general, it's though not prioritizing teaching, not prioritizing learning, but prioritizing like how do we make money and how do we make students happy. And it's like, make students happy by teaching them, not by just making courses as easy as possible.
No, I think you're like totally right. And also like sort of like leading into how I think it should be done. Like, I don't know, like, I don't think there is like a standardized, like quantitative. Can you tell that I didn't do great in the research methods class? But I don't think that there's a standardized sort of quantitative way to measure the performance of a university, especially when, like, obviously, like, as we have pretty much said, like, we believe the function of a university is to teach people stuff, and for people to learn and better society. And that's a really hard thing to measure. So I think it's a very hard thing to evaluate. I think maybe like, because like asking about student experience doesn't always work, because like Asenia said, sometimes students are just like, if I didn't get a 90, this class gets a 0. Other times students are like really lenient, and so like it's kind of difficult to sort of figure out when a university is doing well by the people who sort of live, work, and learn in and around it.
Yeah, because like University of Toronto is like very highly respected, but when I talk to people who go there, they're like, there's so many people in my class, I've never spoken to my professor, and I don't really know, like I don't feel connected to the other people who go there. And it's like, okay, so they're a good business, they make a lot of money, and they have a ton of students, but is it a good university if you're not really getting, we were talking about earlier, the value of networking through universities, and it's like, really, you're not going to get that at U of T unless you're like really putting in extra work and like staying after class and going to office hours, which unless you need that to learn, you shouldn't have to be doing to get a good university experience.
I think it's also hard to rate universities at all. I know that's a big thing. Like there's like those national rankings and even international rankings of universities, although not many Canadian universities make that list. But I find that so hard to quantify and hard to make sense of that. Like, the reality is most people go to one university their whole life, maybe two. Like the average number cannot be that high, frankly. So like, how are people judging like that type of judgment kind of requires comparison, I think. You know what I mean? Like to say like, oh, well, this one was, I enjoyed this at this university, but this other one, they did this really well. But like, I feel like most people are not in any position to know that. They just kind of parrot what they're told, right? And like the only way they can be quantifying that is by, like you said, the enrollment and the difficulty of the admission requirement and their endowment, things like that.
Yeah, and like revenue and those things which don't really have as much to do with like what are people learning. And then when you think about like jobs, it's like, well, some more prestigious universities might lead to better jobs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the education there is better or worse. I also think like different universities, every university is going to have different faculty in different departments, and so some faculty might be really strong and some might not be.
Yeah, I know that's one thing that like a lot of people when I was going to high school were talking about is like in Canada, like the prestigiousness of a school is more like program based. Like it's far more impressive to get into like I think like computer science or engineering at like Waterloo than it is to like, I don't know, get into Waterloo's like creative writing program. So in that way it makes it really hard to evaluate because it's like Waterloo's a great school if you're doing science, or it's like U of T is a great school, again, if you're doing science, or like even people who are like, Brock is a great school if you're doing Con Ed or sport management. Like it's totally dependent on the faculty, on the program, on what you're learning, because like they sort of do quantify like graduate success by who's able to get a job, and like Con Ed and SPEMA at Brock, yeah, pretty safe bet you're gonna get a job.
And even that is questionable because it's like, yeah, these schools get high ratings because they have super competitive programs, and people, it looks good on resume that you graduated from that school and that program. But so many of those programs, people drop out like crazy because they can't handle the stress of it all, and it's made purposefully stressful so then they can maintain their public appearance of, they have this dropout rate, and the admissions requirements are so high, and to stay in the program is so hard, right? Like that's the measure of success. But it's like you're leaving all these people in your wake who are just miserable, and some of them just completely snap, and it's like that, and that's the measure of the quality of the program, I guess, that they have no free time and their lives are miserable and they drop out and don't have a degree and have wasted so much money. And it's like,
all right, so the next topic we're covering is romantic comedies in anticipation of Valentine's Day, of course. So this week and last week, I wrote about some romantic comedies. So last week, I wrote about When Harry Met Sally, which is kind of a classic that I wanted to write about. And then this week, I wrote about Always Be My Maybe, which is from 2019. So it's more of a recent one, but I think it's a really, really strong romantic comedy. It's very funny. And I rewatched it, obviously, for the article, and I was really surprised by how just sort of creative and funny it is while still operating in the romantic comedy structure. It stars Ali Wong and Randall Park, who are both amazing. And so we were also talking about how, while some romantic comedies are better than others, the genre sometimes gets lumped into the so bad it's good category. I think this happens a lot with really formulaic movies. There are some really amazing ones that absolutely stand out, and then there are a lot where it's like someone takes the formula and just makes an absolute mess of it. I wrote about The Royal Treatment a while ago, and I think that movie absolutely falls into the category of like they follow the formula, but the writing and the acting are bad, so it's just an absolute mess, and it's kind of hilarious because of that. And so Holly wrote an opinion piece about how bad movies are good movies, and so that sort of ties into our discussion of romantic comedies. What are your guys' favorite romantic comedies?
I think I'm gonna like surprise absolutely no one by saying that I don't watch a lot of romantic comedies. It's just not a genre that like, I don't know, I don't find it super interesting. I don't get me wrong, I love a good romance plot, but I'd rather like watch a movie about something else with like a B plot that's about like two people falling in love. So I honestly cannot remember the last time I watched a romantic comedy. I'm legitimately trying very hard to think. I don't think I have one.
I think there are a lot of movies that aren't romantic comedies, but that you could argue are romantic comedies because there's a romance plot and they're funny. And my favorite example of that is Shrek. Noah, do you have a favorite romantic comedy?
I mean, if we're counting Shrek as a romantic comedy, then yeah, definitely Shrek. But no, I'm in the same boat as Holly. They're really not my thing. Much to the chagrin of my girlfriend, who likes to watch a lot of them. But Always Be My Maybe actually looked really good. I watched the trailer when I was getting the photo for this week, and it looked really funny. So I might actually, give that one a try. I'm looking through a list of 60 of the top ones right now, and I've seen like maybe 5 or 6 of them, and most of my thoughts were not great on those movies. Like Mamma Mia is on here, and I hate that movie. I'm one of the few people that's like a music fan of ABBA and not at all. Like I hate those movies. I hate both of them a lot.
That is devastating.
I'm a much bigger fan of the music, definitely, than I am of those movies. But Shrek is a fantastic movie.
Does Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing count as a romantic comedy?
I would think that that is the blueprint for a romantic comedy.
Great, then that's my favorite.
That's my favorite Shakespeare play, and I think it's probably one of the best romantic comedies.
Tying it into Holly's article about So Bad It's Good, on top of the grown-ups style movies that Adam Sandler makes, which Holly mentioned in your article, he also has like a subgenre of just like very generic, formulaic romantic comedies, and they're not terrible. One particularly that stands out is Just Go With It in my mind. I actually like that one. Very formulaic, very generic movie with a couple of those just very lowball, just gross classic Adam Sandler stylings that you mentioned in your article, Holly.
Yeah, something I found really interesting about Holly's article was the of the people who are really serious about movies, it seems like half of them are like Marvel is the stuff, and then half of them are the serious dramas are the stuff, and I'm definitely one of the serious drama people. I have absolutely no interest in Adam Sandler or his movies. And so I like romantic comedies, but the ones I like are the ones that are kind of elevated, or they do something that I think is interesting in the genre, because I'm a bit more pretentious about movies.
Like I said in the article, I tried so hard to be a pretentious movie person. I tried to watch all the Oscar movies. I tried to watch every movie that's ever won Best Picture, and I got bored. And the most fun that I have watching a movie is when my sister's like, "Do you want to watch Grown Ups 2 tonight?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I want to watch Grown Ups 2 tonight." That movie is terrible, but it's funny because sometimes people getting punched in the face is funny. So I do think that I'm a big fan of the not even so bad it's good, just it's good in a different way. To enjoy Much Ado About Nothing and then also to enjoy Wayne's World. I understand that that's a weird thing, but also I guess my article was just kind of a little bit tongue in cheek, calling the Fast and the Furious high art. But then also just people like what they like, and it's fine. Everyone has different tastes. My tastes happen to not include rom-coms all that often.
I have to say, I think one of my favorite rom-coms is probably Gone Girl, which is only a rom-com because there is a romantic relationship between the characters and it's a kind of comedy, but in every other way it's not a rom-com at all. Because I guess, yeah, I only really like super specific rom-coms, which is why I just focused on 2 that I think are outstanding to lead up to Valentine's Day. I do think that Much Ado About Nothing, it's the rom-com sort of its time, it was supposed to be appealing to the masses, and in modern staging there's a lot of really goofy physical choices that people can make to make it funny to current audiences, and I think that if you're going to produce Shakespeare, you have to try to make it new and funny in a way that people today will find funny rather than people hundreds of years ago.
Shakespeare consistently goes right over my head, and I hate it every time I've had to be. Anytime I've had to endure a Shakespeare play, it's driven me insane. This is one thing I cannot understand at all.
And that's why I think the best Shakespeare adaptations of our time are the ones where some early 2000s director went, I'm going to turn 12th Night into a teen rom-com. Like, She's the Man is a wonderful Shakespeare adaptation, and, like, that's a hill that I'll die on. I think, like, yeah, it's doing the rom-com thing of making it, like, accessible to everybody. And I do really sort of tend to enjoy that style of thing.
Yeah, like, I think 10 Things I Hate About You is one of my favorite rom-coms as well, and that's based on one of Shakespeare's plays that I don't ever really have any interest in seeing, because it's The Taming of the Shrew, which I don't really like that play, but that movie is hilarious and delightful and super romantic and very fun to watch, and I do think that genre of, like, let's take Shakespeare and make it something that normal people will just like is really cool, because I sometimes take for granted the fact that, like, I can watch a Shakespeare play and understand what's going on. Like, I was watching Macbeth with one of my friends, and she was like, so what's happening? And I was like, oh, right. If you don't already know what's going to happen, it is very confusing when people talk like that.
Yeah, I guess I like Lion King, technically. The modernized adaptations are good. I agree, Holly. And Asenia.
I like watching Shakespeare with subtitles so that I can read along with it, because sometimes there's, like, words that I don't know, and then when I see them written, I'm like, okay, I can figure out from context what that means. But then also, yeah, like, part of it is watching things like Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth. It's like, I know what's going on, whereas when I watched Henry VIII, I was like, I really had to focus, because I'd never interacted with that play before, and I was like, what I
Media is definitely escape for me and turn off my brain. And so I think that's why it has always turned me off to it, because of that. Like, I'm not one about doing homework to enjoy something, which certainly not in the same way, but, like, in a related way is why I'm not a huge fan of all the Marvel stuff, which Holly also mentioned, and is, like, becoming a new funny lane of, like, people who think they know, think they're cinema snobs, but the only thing they're snobbish about is Marvel movies. So I saw that someone said that the new Spider-Man was snubbed for not being nominated for Best Picture, which, as someone who, similarly to Holly, does not watch, like, the high art type films, even I know that's, it just sounds so stupid to say that. You don't sound smart saying that.
Yeah, like, that movie was fun, but it wasn't art. And I don't think movies have to be art, but it certainly doesn't really compare to the things that are nominated for Best Picture, which are movies that, like, some thought was put into them beyond just, like, what's gonna get people to freak out in the theater.
I also think, like, both sides of the, like, Marvel is the stuff and, like, high drama is the stuff side, I think they just, like, miss the point that, like, hey, movies can and are supposed to be fun. Like, I think I made the point in the article, I might have taken the sentence out, but one of the things that I was sort of saying and thinking about is, like, if we're going to consider cinema art, which, like, it's an art form, you go to art school to become a filmmaker, whatever. If we're going to consider it art, I think we also have to consider that not all art is as provocative as other art. Like, some art is to make you think something, some art is to make you feel something, some art tries to make a grand sweeping statement, and some art is, like, decoration. And I think movies can be decoration if you are watching them that way. A lot of my favorite movies certainly, I think, would qualify as, like, decoration.
I saw a tweet recently from a playwright that I follow, and she said, not all theater needs to be dessert, and not all theater needs to be vegetables. And sometimes you can think something is dessert, and then it is vegetables. And I was like, that's a weird metaphor, but the sentiment of, like, sometimes things can just be fun and be good because they're fun and enjoyable and they're not really making you think about the world, that has more value sometimes than something that's going to make you think about climate change or fascism or whatever terrible thing is going on in the world. I also, back to the Marvel point, I think a lot of people who only watch Marvel movies have read another book syndrome, which a lot of people who are like really into Harry Potter have, where it's like you read Harry Potter as a kid and then you never really read anything else, so you think it's the best literature there is. And it's, I think Marvel, because they just keep making stuff, people who got into it as a kid grow up with it and that's all they watch, and then they're like, the themes, it's so cool, but it's like, okay, but have you actually watched movies that are doing themes? Because it's okay to like Marvel movies and they're a lot of fun sometimes, but sometimes it's just $200 million being spent on something that's going to make money.
Yeah, like Marvel movies, I think, cost so much money and they like dominate like box office release, where it's like I can definitely see why people hate just like the Marvel Cinematic Universe machine for that reason, because they do kind of take over everything and make it a lot harder for like weird indie movies to get even like produced and greenlit. So I can definitely like understand that take. And I think like there is a lot of people who like are super into like Marvel movies who are like, these movies are like to use like the dessert and vegetables metaphor, like they, depending on like how it's going to suit their argument, they will say that they are either dessert or vegetables, but really like they don't always do a great job of being either. Like I think there are some Marvel movies that make like an excellent point about like the human condition and the world and are fun and have like a place just like in cinema. And then there are others that are just like Thing Go Boom. And I think if you enjoy Thing Go Boom, there's no shame in enjoying Thing Go Boom. But also, like, you don't need to insist that that is the best way to watch a movie. Just like you don't need to insist that, like, the best way to watch a movie is to sit there for 3 hours and watch The Irishman and have to take notes to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think the main thing that comes out of this discussion is, like, everyone should just enjoy what they want to enjoy and not tell other people they're wrong for enjoying what they like. You know? Because it's like, you're not better than someone else if you liked The Lighthouse. But you're also not better than someone else if you liked Spider-Man.
Yeah, what's your favorite movie is my least favorite question to answer, because people will be like, what is your favorite movie? And I do not fall on either side of the debate. So they'll be like, what's your favorite movie? And I will say Wayne's World 2. And then they'll be like, really? And I will go, yeah. And that's the end of the conversation. And I hate it because everybody just wants to sort of talk about why they think their kind of movie is the best.
Yeah, I feel the same, where it's like my favorite movies are from like a variety of different genres, and some of them I know are not technically that good, but there's something about them that I find really comforting or relatable, and so that's a movie that I like. And so when people are like, what's your favorite movie, or what are your top 5 favorite movies, I'm like, I don't want to define your entire perception of me based on what movies I watch when I'm like want to watch something. Like American Ultra is one of my favorite movies, not because I think it's good, just because there's something like fun about stupid, gory comedy where a bunch of people get murdered.
I think the takeaway from this, on top of people should just enjoy what they enjoy, is that YouTube video essays from film students and graduates trying to say why X or Y blockbuster movie is the greatest thing ever made are rotting our brains. And we need to stop watching them, and they need to stop being made, because I think that's what's driving this whole nonsense not this conversation, but the whole like Marvel blockbuster versus high art drama debate.
I more and more like see videos where people point out things that were very obvious and like the entire intention of a scene on a surface level, and they're like, isn't that deep? Isn't this director smart? And it's like, I'm glad you noticed that, but you were supposed to notice that. Like, not everything has to be like a 30-minute YouTube video essay. You can just watch a movie and then not make a TikTok about it.
So the last article that we are going to talk about this week is an article that I wrote, again, about a little evergreen topic. Nothing super controversial happening in the world of, I guess, things to have an opinion about. I guess at least that I haven't already had an opinion about. Really seems like they're recycling the same controversies every week, but I digress. I wrote about math, which is super interesting and fun. I'm sure everyone is looking so forward to discussing math. But, I talked about why I guess so many people hate math, and sort of looked into sort of the concept of like math anxiety, which is like a real genuine thing, where people just kind of are so anxious about math that they will avoid learning it, and it like happens to people like as young as kindergarten, which is sort of crazy that like a school subject can do that to like a 4-year-old. But yeah, so I talked about why people hate math and why I think it's down to sort of the way that people are taught math. It's not really taught as a skill. It's kind of taught as like an innate thing that some people are good at and everyone else just kind of has to suffer through. It's also taught as like something that's like testable rather than something that you want people to be able to master to move on to the next thing. And then the other thing that I talked about was that just like societally, we talk about math in a very, very negative way. I remember going to kindergarten and my parents being like, "What'd you learn today?" And I was like, "I learned to count." And then my parents were like, "Oh, just you wait until math gets evil," and just this perception of math as evil. So that was one of my opinions this week. So I guess to ask both of you, I know we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, just like, what was your experience with math growing up? Were you good at it?
I said I was good at math earlier, but I did, like, my dad helped me a lot with math homework. But once I got something, I was good at, like, figuring things out and working through problems. And I did pretty well in math for a while. And then I got too busy to take extra time to, like, sit down and figure stuff out. And I had in my grade 11 class, like, the teacher switched out partway through the year, and then we had a different teacher, and he wasn't very good, and I had already gotten behind because the teacher switched out at the beginning, and I stopped being able to do math, and I got really anxious about it, and I would, like, hide in the bathroom instead of going to class, because I was, like, very stressed about math. And so now I'm not a math person at all, but I used to be good at it, and I'm still good at, like, puzzles and problem solving, and so I kind of feel like a little bit sad that I don't really know how to do math anymore, because I think it was something that I could have been good at had it been taught in a way that was, like, more accessible to me and my pace of learning, because now I don't know anything.
I have a similar kind of history with math. I was definitely the kid who was told, like, "Oh, you have, like, the math gift or whatever," when I was young. And obviously I was the kid who, made other kids feel bad growing up that they were not good at math. But that's, I was a young, impressionable mind who, like Holly said, was, on the other side, kind of like the flip side of that, like, determinist view, right? That, it just, math is how it is, and like everyone experiences it the same way. And either, you got it because you were, you had the superhero ability that you were endowed with at birth, or you are meant to just suffer through it until you can not do it anymore and be done with it. So that was me for a while. And then I think it was 10th grade when things kind of went off the rails. Again, bad teacher, Asenia said, but also I got used to not having to, work too hard at it. And you had that confidence of everyone telling me how I was just naturally able to do math. And then the second something threw a curveball, it was a pretty steep and sudden decline. It was 10th grade. I think I might have taken 11th grade math. I think you had to, but I don't remember much of that. I don't think that was a great grade on my report card. But I have not looked back since on math, but I really do appreciate your take on it in the article, Holly, because I think that whole way we talk about it is so screwed up, so ridiculous.
Yeah, I was also like kind of the same. I was pretty good at math in elementary school. I I was really good at like memorizing things, so I got the multiplication tables down really quickly, and I guess like once you get the multiplication tables down, it's super easy to sort of reverse engineer that to be really good at like long division and also to be like quite good at algebra. Like I was really good at like the easy basic algebra stuff. So I was like quite good at math through like 7th and 8th grade. And then I got to like 9th grade and I was taking like academic math because, you know, obviously you have to take academic math. Because they were like, smart kid goes into academic math. We're going to try and make a scientist. But I took grade 9 academic math. I wasn't great at it. I missed like a week of it because I was sick. And I missed like the whole y equals mx plus b lesson and just completely fell off. Had no idea what was going on. And then 10th grade math also sucked. I remember I can't remember if I did it on purpose or if I was just like so anxious that like I was like, there is no other way out of this than to start sobbing in the middle of the exam. So I was writing my grade 10 math exam and I just started crying and my teacher was like, oh my God, this kid is not, this is math anxiety right here. So they like sent me down to guidance. And I think one of the guidance counselors actually ended up just writing the exam for me. And then because that sucked so bad, and I didn't have to take math to get into any of the college programs or university programs that I was looking at, I took college level math in grade 11, which was just like, I don't want to say it was pointless because there was definitely a point. It was a lot of like personal finance stuff, but repeated sort of ad infinitum to the point where no one was paying attention. So that was my math experience. And now I am taking grade 12 math because as it turns out, when you change your major into sport management, they do in fact want you to have grade 12 math. So I am taking grade 12 math to catch up. And what I have realized is, holy moly, this was easy. And I'm real mad that I didn't just do it in high school because it's not hard and I don't have like a weird genetic predisposition to being bad at math.
I think we were talking about sort of like what makes math so scary. And I think part of it is like, as a kid, people telling you like, oh, if you're not good at math, you're not going to be able to get a good job and then you won't have any money and that'll suck. And it's like, there's so many jobs where you don't really need to know how to do complicated math. It obviously helps to know math because it does, like, in small ways come up in life. But that's part of, I think, what made me so anxious about math when I was younger was this idea that, like, if you're not good at math, you're not going to be able to get a good job. And I come from a family of engineers. Like, both of my sisters are studying engineering and my dad is an engineer. So obviously all of them are really good at math and they're really into math. And I'm like, well, I can understand Shakespeare without needing to look up the translation into easier language. But I can't really do long division. And so, yeah, I think there's like this intense sort of, if you don't know math, you're not going to be able to do anything. But it's like, you can still do stuff. You're just going to do different stuff. And I think that sort of frustrates me.
And, like, different stuff, including, like, different math, too. Like, I am in SPEMA right now. Last year, I took an intro to sport finance class. This year, I'm taking a sport finance class. And I know that, like, when you put sport in front of finance, it makes it sound like it's going to be easy. I was actually talking to my roommate who used to be in accounting, and she was like, no, the concepts that they are teaching you are, like, these are the accounting formulas. You are learning how to do accounting. And I didn't find that difficult or hard. It was formulas, it was addition, it was subtraction. It was sometimes a little bit of multiplication. And that kind of math is like fine. That kind of math is like easy to me. I understand that. And I think a lot of the sort of anxiety that I got, especially in like 10th grade math, came from a place of like, I didn't know like how or where these concepts were applicable. I didn't know like in what context you would use it. Like, I remember, because it was always like the funny guy thing to be like, Miss, when are we going to use this in real life? And the teacher would just be like, you just have to learn it. Or like make up some like weird example that like actually wouldn't happen in real life. But like if they had just sort of like said like, hey, these higher concepts in math are going to be super useful to people who want to be engineers, who want to like get into physics. I don't know, the science kids, they are going to use these high concepts of math. And you should still learn them because it's useful to learn how to solve problems like that. It is useful to train your brain in that logical sort of problem-solving thinking way. But also, if you don't get it, it's fine. The hardest math that you're going to have to do is like multiplying decimals. And I think if they had even just like explained that or said that like once, I probably wouldn't have lost my mind so much doing math homework.
It's also insane that, you know, you're tracking people from essentially 8th grade when you're, you know, getting ready to go into high school and you have to pick your courses and all that. Like, they already start tracking you, right, with the academic and applied level courses. And like, I've heard that the tracking is, they're toying with getting rid of it, which is a great thing. But just to think that, what, you're 12 in 8th grade, and essentially like that decision of if you're up to snuff for academic versus applied, you're already tracking people not just in their classes, but like potentially just in the way that they think about themselves and like their confidence and their abilities to do things and like how much they limit themselves personally, just like on a subconscious level. Like, that does a lot of, I don't know if necessarily damage is the right word, but like it has a huge impact on how people think about themselves and like how much they apply themselves, and like it's just wild. And I can't believe they do it so young. And like, I mean, honestly, I'm sure there's cases where it happens younger than that, but like still, even 12 is just, it's absurd.
Yeah, like one opinion that I have is that tracking is bad for people, and not just because it's like limiting the math that they're going to be able to learn, but because I remember in high school there was like, it was like a social divide between the people who took, and it almost always came down to what math class and what English class you were in. There was a social divide between the people who took academic level classes and people who took applied level classes, and especially math. Like there was a like borderline cultural difference. Like it was like to use like a very like rudimentary example, it was like you never saw the kids who took academic classes in the smoking pit. The kids who were in applied classes were the ones who always got blamed for starting fights. And it's just like, it very much has to, like, there are so many other factors, but it very much has to do with like, you're telling a 12-year-old already what their capabilities are, and you're telling them what they should expect from themselves. And so if you're telling a 12-year-old like, don't expect great things from yourself, like obviously that then becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I know one thing that like happened to me when I switched from, because grade 10 I took academic math and then grade 11 I took college level math. One thing that happened to me was it was like switching into a class with people who had taken applied level math the whole time. It felt like a different environment. The teachers didn't care as much about those kids. They didn't expect them to learn as much. There weren't as many expectations. And, while it's not great to place huge expectations, it's, I think, a good thing to have some, to not just assume that they're all going to be like delinquents or something.
It's concerning, definitely, and like definitely should change. It definitely needs to change, because I mean, you're right. I did not see any of the college track, applied track kids in classes or anything. So like throughout most of the day, I wouldn't see them in high school because I was in the academic classes and they were separate. And generally speaking, we had the better teachers in the academic classes, and they had worse teachers, and they. Their classes might have acted out more or whatever. And it's like so much of this is controlled by, how we told them in 8th grade that, or even before that you're not going to amount to much academically. And it's like, it's so screwed up, and it's so crazy that they still are doing that.
It's really like interesting for me to hear about this, because I went to an arts high school. So the social divide was like, what art you specialized in. So all the music kids were friends, and all the visual arts kids were friends, and all the theater kids were friends. and I like have no real awareness of what the divide was like for college versus academic math. And I think we only had one level of English, but yeah, like that's something that sounds so crazy and messed up to me because I'm like, I don't know, I come from like a totally different sort of high school experience.
It's not so much that people cared. It's just more that it created a natural divide because you just didn't have, you didn't have classes with those people. And yeah, and then there's that little bit of like the genetic determinist stuff plays into it a little bit, but it's not like people necessarily cared specifically about the class. It's more just like it created like not circumstances, but like just an environment where you had that type of division, and it was based on something that we were taught was like intrinsic to you and like your genetic code, which is just so weird and it's so messed up. But
it sort of goes back to what we were talking about, like with people deciding what they want to do in university when they're 17 and then having to go to university and realize that that's not necessarily what they actually wanted. But it's like you're in middle school and someone says you're bad at math, and that changes the whole trajectory of your life. You sort of mentioned that already, but weird system.
It's also like, I think like doubly weird because we super do not do that really with other disciplines. Like, I guess like to an extent people are like, some kids just don't like reading, but that doesn't mean that we stop trying to teach them English. As I get older, I'm realizing that like math is a skill. You can't just be good at math. It's like the same way that like painting or like writing is a skill. You can't just be good at it. It is something that you have to practice. And like we do like socially have the idea of like some people are just better at some things and some people are just like naturally talented and gifted in certain areas, but it is so just like heavy with math
and resources to them. And again, that's another layer pulling it back, so I'm going to leave it there so I don't keep drawing us further and further from the specific point of talking about math. And that does it for another episode of The Latest. Thank you, Holly and Asenia, for joining me today to talk about these great articles that the two of you wrote, as well as Chad's article. And thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you tuning in. Remember that you can find the full articles we talked about here today and many, many more at our website, www.brockpress.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at The Brock Press. On top of following us on social media, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, you name it. Any place you listen to podcasts, you'll find us. Just look up The Latest, The Brock Press Podcast, and you should find us with no issues. You can also find the podcast on our YouTube channel and at our website. With all that said, thanks again, and we will see you next time for another episode.